You picked the wrong door. The words were quiet. Too quiet for a hallway where three armed men had just cornered one of the most powerful women in America. Derek Kane actually laughed. He stood beneath the flickering service light with a pistol hanging loose in his right hand, his expensive black jacket darkened by rain at the shoulders. Behind him, two other men blocked the narrow corridor. No badges, no uniforms, no hesitation. And between them stood Claire Whitmore, 36, CEO of Whitmore Aerospace. The woman whose name moved markets before breakfast and made senators return phone calls before lunch. But right now, none of that mattered. Her phone was gone. Her security detail was gone. And the steel fire door behind her had already clicked shut. Kane tilted his head toward the man standing beside a maintenance cart. "You talking to me?" Ethan Walker didn't answer immediately. He wore faded work pants, a gray maintenance shirt, and an old canvas jacket with one sleeve darkened by grease. A screwdriver rested in one hand. A hotel access badge hung from his chest. Nothing about him looked important. Nothing about him looked dangerous. That was what made Kane smile. One of the gunmen glanced at Ethan's badge. Maintenance. The second man chuckled. "Wrong night to fix a light bulb, old man." Claire looked at Ethan then. Really looked at him. She had passed him twice earlier that evening without remembering his face. A worker. Background. One of those invisible people powerful guests walked around without ever seeing. Now he stood between her and three guns. "Leave," Claire whispered. Ethan's eyes stayed on Kane. "Sir, please. They'll kill you." Still nothing. The fluorescent light above them buzzed faintly. Somewhere behind the walls, an industrial vent rattled with a slow metallic rhythm. Ethan set the screwdriver carefully on the maintenance cart. Not dropped. Not tossed. Placed. Kane noticed. His grin widened. "You deaf?" "No, stupid." "No, then move." Ethan finally lifted his eyes. There was no anger in them. That bothered Claire more than anger would have. Most men staring down three guns would bargain, panic, threaten, or beg. Ethan Walker did none of those things. He simply looked. At Kane's feet. At the second man's shoulder. At the third man's grip. 3 glances. Nothing more. Kane stepped forward and shoved him hard in the chest. Ethan moved back half a step. The gunman laughed. Claire flinched. But Ethan didn't. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't reach for the weapon. He just straightened the front of his jacket. Quiet dignity has a strange way of making cruelty look smaller. "You people always like this?" Kane asked. Ethan's voice came low. "Like what?" "Pretending you matter." Another laugh. The words should have humiliated him. Instead, Ethan glanced once toward Claire, then toward the locked stairwell door behind Kane. His face changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear. Recognition. Claire saw it. And for the first time since the ambush began, she wondered if this maintenance worker knew something the gunman didn't. Kane raised the pistol and pressed it lightly against Ethan's chest. Last chance. Ethan looked down at the barrel, then back into Kane's eyes. "My daughter is waiting for me." Kane smirked. "Then you should have minded your business." A pause. The hallway seemed to shrink around them. Claire could hear her own breathing now. Slow. Uneven. Ethan's remained steady. He leaned slightly closer to Kane. Not enough to challenge him. Just enough to make the next words impossible to misunderstand. "I am." The smile disappeared from Kane's face. Because in that exact moment, Ethan had noticed the safety position on the pistol, the weight imbalance in the second gunman's stance, and the trembling trigger finger of the youngest man near the door. And suddenly, 3 armed men were no longer the only people in that hallway keeping secrets. 12 hours earlier, Ethan Walker had been standing beneath the pale morning lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel with a wrench in one hand and a paper cup of coffee going cold beside his toolbox. At 41, he had learned that most people only noticed maintenance workers when something stopped working. The elevator stalled. The lights flickered. The air conditioning died in July. Then suddenly a man like Ethan mattered for 5 minutes. After that, he disappeared again. He preferred it that way. "Walker, lobby fixtures first," his supervisor called from across the marble floor. "And try not to look like you slept in your truck." A few nearby employees laughed. Ethan glanced down at his worn canvas jacket, then back at the ceiling panel he was repairing. "Did not sleep in the truck. Could have fooled me." More laughter. Ethan said nothing. He tightened the fixture, tested the connection, and climbed down from the ladder. There had been a time when silence meant waiting for an order, listening for movement. counting the seconds between one danger and the next. Now silence meant keeping a job, paying a mortgage, and making sure his 9-year-old daughter never felt the weight he carried. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Sophie. He stepped toward the service corridor before answering. Hey, kiddo. You forgot my permission slip. Ethan closed his eyes. It is on the kitchen counter. I know. That is why you forgot it. He smiled despite himself. Sophie had inherited her mother's timing. I will bring it after work. You promised movie night. I remember. You always say that. The words were playful, but they landed deeper than she knew. Ethan looked through the narrow service window toward the bright hotel lobby, where men in tailored suits moved beneath chandeliers worth more than his house. I will be home, he said. Promise. Ethan paused. Promises had once been easy for him. Life had cured him of that. Promise. At 9:30 that morning, Claire Whitmore entered the hotel surrounded by assistants, attorneys, and security personnel. She wore a charcoal suit, carried no visible briefcase, and walked with the focused calm of someone used to rooms changing temperature when she entered them. Ethan was kneeling beside an electrical panel when her group passed. One executive nearly stepped on his toolbox. Can you move that? The man snapped. Ethan pulled it aside. Of course. Claire glanced back for half a second. Their eyes met. She gave a distracted nod, the kind people offered without expecting to remember the face attached to it. Then she disappeared into the conference wing. Ethan returned to the panel. But something about her security detail bothered him. Not Claire. Not yet. One of the men at the rear kept checking reflective surfaces instead of exits. Another wore an earpiece, but never touched it. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind most people would never notice. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. By noon, word had spread through the hotel that Whitmore Aerospace was preparing a major announcement involving federal contracts, missing funds, and internal corruption. Employees whispered about billions of dollars. Reporters gathered outside. Security doubled near the elevators. Ethan listened without appearing to listen. Then, while replacing a damaged access panel on the 12th floor, he saw a hotel camera blink off. 5 seconds later, the next one went dark. Then the third. Ethan slowly lowered his screwdriver. 3 cameras. Same corridor. Same sequence. He looked toward the emergency stairwell and felt an old instinct rise from somewhere he had spent years teaching himself to ignore. This was not faulty wiring. And whatever was coming, it had already entered the building. By 12:45, the 12th floor had changed in ways most people would never notice. The conference staff still carried coffee trays. Reporters still waited behind velvet ropes downstairs. Hotel guests still complained about slow elevators and weak wireless internet. But Ethan saw the small fractures beneath the normal surface. A service door that should have been locked stood open by half an inch. A security guard who had been posted near the east elevators was gone. The hallway camera above Suite 1208 showed no status light at all. Ethan stood beside his cart and listened. No alarm. No shouting. Just the steady hum of climate control and the faint clink of glassware from a banquet room 2 corridors away. That was what troubled him. Real trouble rarely announced itself first. It arrived quietly and counted on people ignoring the details. Walker. His supervisor rounded the corner, already irritated. Why are you standing around? Ethan nodded toward the dead camera. Security feed is down. Then call security. I did. And no answer. The supervisor sighed. You are maintenance, not law enforcement. Fix what is on your list. Ethan looked at him for a moment. The access panel outside Whitmore's conference room was open this morning. So, it was not opened by hotel staff. The man gave a humorless laugh. You know that because you have magical screwdriver instincts. Ethan let the insult pass. He had learned years ago that pride was expensive, and Sophie needed groceries more than he needed the last word. Because the screws were replaced backward. His supervisor stared at him. Just do your job, Ethan. I am. The man walked away shaking his head. Ethan waited until the footsteps faded, then checked his phone. One missed text from Sophie. Do not forget the permission slip. He smiled faintly, typed, I will not, and slipped the phone away. Then he heard voices from the conference wing. Claire's voice came first, controlled but sharper than before. No, we release everything today. Another man answered, low and urgent. Ethan recognized him as Miles Grant, Claire's head of security. You need to reconsider the timing. The timing is exactly why we are doing it now. There are people involved who will not take this quietly. Claire stepped into view with Miles beside her. Two attorneys followed. She looked composed, but there was strain behind her eyes now. Miles noticed Ethan and immediately lowered his voice. "Maintenance problem?" he asked. Ethan held up the small access panel cover. "Someone opened this without authorization." Miles glanced at it for less than a second. Too fast. "Probably housekeeping." "Housekeeping does not use security bits." Claire looked from Ethan to Miles. "Is there an issue?" "No issue," Miles said smoothly. "Everything is secure." Ethan said nothing. Claire studied him. She seemed to remember seeing him downstairs. "You disagree?" she asked. Miles turned, annoyed. Ethan kept his tone even. "I think you should use the west stairwell if you leave this floor." "Why?" "Because somebody wants the east side blind." The attorneys exchanged uneasy looks. Miles stepped closer. "Mr. Walker, was it? I appreciate the concern, but this is handled." Ethan looked at the security chief's polished shoes, then at the emergency exit behind him. "Then you already know 3 cameras are down." Miles did not answer immediately. It was only a second, maybe less. But Ethan saw it. Claire saw it too. Then somewhere down the hall, a magnetic lock released with a soft click. Ethan's eyes shifted toward the sound. Miles reached for his earpiece. No response came through. Claire's expression hardened. "What was that?" Nobody answered. A second lock clicked open. Then a third. Ethan set the panel cover down on his cart. His voice was quiet. "You need to move now." Claire did not argue this time. She moved when Ethan moved. Not fast enough to attract attention, not slow enough to waste the warning. Miles stayed close behind her, one hand near his jacket, speaking into an earpiece that still gave him nothing back. "West stairwell," Ethan said. "Why there?" Claire asked. "Because whoever killed the east cameras wants you to believe the obvious route is safe." Miles gave Ethan a cold look. "You are making assumptions." Ethan kept walking. "So are they." The corridor ahead was empty now. Too empty. A hotel cart sat abandoned near the ice machine. One wheel turned slowly, as if someone had pushed it seconds earlier and walked away. Claire noticed Ethan glance at it. "What?" "Nothing yet." "That is not comforting." "It is not supposed to be." They reached the west stairwell door. Ethan stopped before touching the handle. He looked at the floor, then the latch, then the narrow strip of shadow beneath the door. 3 details. 1 decision. "Not this way." Miles exhaled sharply. "You just told us to use it." "That was before I saw this." "Saw what?" Claire asked. Ethan pointed to a fresh scrape beside the latch. Somebody forced the door open and closed it again. Miles stepped forward. "You cannot know that." Ethan looked at him. "The paint is still on the floor." Silence. Claire lowered her eyes. A tiny gray chip rested beside her heel. She looked back at Ethan differently now. Less like a maintenance worker. More like a question she had not solved yet. "Where do we go?" she asked. "Service corridor." Miles shook his head immediately. "No. Too narrow." "Exactly. That makes it easier to trap us. It also makes it harder to approach without being heard." Miles stared at him. "You have done this before." Ethan's expression did not change. "I have worked in old buildings." Claire almost smiled, but the moment did not allow it. They turned toward the service corridor. The lights there were dimmer, the carpet replaced by plain tile, the polished hotel disappearing into pipes, utility doors, and humming electrical cabinets. Ethan knew every turn. He had spent months fixing what wealthy guests never saw. A leaking valve, a dead sensor, a damaged lock, invisible systems holding up visible comfort. Maybe that was why he understood danger so well. Important things were often hidden behind ordinary walls. Claire's phone suddenly lost signal. She checked it twice. No service. Miles checked his own. Same. Ethan looked toward a ceiling panel. "Signal repeater is offline. Can you restore it?" Claire asked. "Not from here." A sound came from behind them. Shoes on tile. Measured. Unhurried. Ethan raised one hand, and everyone stopped. One step. Then another. Miles whispered, "Security?" Ethan listened. "No, how can you tell?" "Hotel security wears rubber soles." Claire's face tightened. "And those?" Ethan looked toward the corner. Hard leather. The footsteps stopped. Then another sound came from ahead. A door closing softly. Claire turned. "We are boxed in." Ethan scanned the corridor once. Utility room. Linen storage. Mechanical access. No windows. No guests. He pointed to a narrow service door beside the maintenance alcove. Inside, Miles hesitated. That room has one exit. I know. Then why would we go in there? Ethan opened the door and looked at Claire. Because right now, I need them to think they chose where this ends. Claire stepped inside. Miles followed. Ethan entered last and pulled the door almost closed, leaving the latch just short of catching. The room smelled faintly of dust, machine oil, and warm metal. Claire stood beside an old maintenance cart, breathing carefully. Who are you? She whispered. Ethan looked toward the door. A father who promised his daughter he would be home tonight. Then 3 shadows stopped on the other side. The handle moved once, then stopped. Claire held her breath. Miles shifted beside her, but Ethan lifted one finger without looking back. Quiet. The handle moved again, slower this time. Then the door opened. Derek Kane stepped inside first. He was not rushing. Men who believed they controlled a room rarely did. 2 others followed him, spreading just enough to block the narrow exit without crowding each other. Their eyes moved past the pipes, the utility shelves, the old maintenance cart, and finally settled on Claire. Kane smiled. There you are. Claire straightened. Fear had reached her, but it had not taken her dignity. Who sent you? You ask a lot of questions for someone who has run out of doors. His gaze shifted to Miles. And you brought company. Miles stepped half a pace in front of Claire. Hotel security is already looking for us. Kane gave a small laugh. No, they are not. Something in the way he said it made Claire look at Miles. Just for a second. Ethan noticed that too. Kane finally turned toward him. And who is this? One of the other men glanced at Ethan's badge. Maintenance. The third man smiled. Seriously? Kane looked Ethan up and down, from the worn work boots to the grease mark near his sleeve. You picked a bad room to hide in, friend. Ethan said nothing. Did you hear me? Still nothing. Kane stepped closer. I am talking to you. Ethan's eyes remained steady. I heard you. Then move. No. The answer was so simple that the room seemed to grow quieter around it. Kane stared at him, almost amused. You think this is bravery? Ethan shook his head once. No, then what is it? A boundary. One of the men laughed under his breath. A boundary? Kane repeated. You fix air conditioners for a living. Ethan glanced at the tool cart beside him. Among other things. And you think that makes you part of this? No, good. Then step aside. Ethan looked at Claire. She was standing behind him now, saying nothing. Not because she trusted him completely. Not yet. But because everyone else in the room seemed to be performing some version of power, while Ethan was the only one who did not need to. Kane's smile faded. Do not make yourself important. Ethan finally met his eyes. I am not. Then why are you still standing there? Ethan's voice stayed calm. Because she asked for help. Claire blinked. She had not. Not with words. But somewhere between the failed cameras, the dead locks, and the corridor closing around her, Ethan had heard the question anyway. Kane shook his head. You people never learn. Ethan tilted his head slightly. Which people? The ones who think being decent makes them strong. A long silence followed. The old ventilation fan hummed overhead. Somewhere behind the wall, water moved through a pipe with a soft metallic rush. Ethan looked at the 3 men again, not with anger, but with the quiet patience of someone counting what mattered. Distance, position, nerves, control. Then he noticed something else. The youngest man near the door kept looking at Miles. Not Claire. Miles. Once. Twice. 3 times. Ethan's expression did not change, but the last missing piece had just moved into place. Kane stepped closer. Final warning. Ethan looked toward the door behind him, then back at Kane. You should take it. For the first time, none of the 3 men laughed. Kane studied Ethan for several seconds, searching for the nervousness that never came. You really believe you can control this room? He asked. Ethan shook his head. No, the answer caught everyone off guard. Kane frowned. Then what exactly are you doing? Ethan glanced at Claire, then at Miles, then at the youngest man near the door. Keeping people from making things worse. The youngest gunman shifted his weight. Ethan noticed. Miles noticed Ethan noticing. That mattered. Claire stood very still now. The fear was still there, but something else had joined it. Attention. Ethan had not raised his voice once. He had not made a threat. He had not tried to prove anything. Yet every person in the room had started watching him. Kane stepped closer. You think calm makes you dangerous? No, then what does? Ethan's eyes moved briefly to the gun in Kane's hand, then back to his face. Bad decisions. The room went silent again. Kane's jaw tightened. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Ethan answered softly. I know enough. You know nothing. Ethan looked toward the youngest man. He does not want to be here. The young man froze. Kane turned sharply. Ignore him. Ethan continued, still calm. He has looked at Miles 6 times since he walked in. Claire's head turned. Miles did not. That was the first thing that frightened her. What does that mean? She asked. Ethan did not take his eyes off Kane. It means this is not random. Kane's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. Claire saw it. Miles, she said. Do not listen to him. Miles replied too quickly. Ethan finally looked at the security chief. Your radio failed before there's entered the corridor. The system was compromised. You never tried a backup channel. Miles stared at him. Ethan continued. You argued against the west stairwell before I checked it. You knew it was unusable. That is ridiculous. Maybe. Ethan nodded toward the door. Then ask him why he keeps waiting for your signal. The youngest man looked down. There it was. Not confession. Not proof. Just 1 second of hesitation. Sometimes truth entered a room quietly. Claire took 1 step away from Miles. You told me everything was secure. Claire, this man is manipulating you. Answer me. Miles opened his mouth, but Kane interrupted. Enough. His voice had lost its amusement. Ethan turned back to him. You can still leave. Kane laughed once, but there was no humor in it now. You are giving us permission? I am giving you a choice. Why? Ethan glanced at the 3 men. Because whatever you were promised is not worth what comes next. Claire looked at him. How do you know? Ethan's face softened for the first time. Because I have spent a long time learning the difference between stopping a problem and becoming one. No one spoke. Even Kane hesitated. Ethan did not move toward anyone. He simply reached behind him and pressed a small red maintenance switch on the wall. A low mechanical tone sounded through the room. Then the ventilation system shut down. Silence became almost complete. Kane looked toward the ceiling. What did you do? Reset the floor controls. Why? Ethan listened. Far away, faint but growing, came the sound of emergency systems returning online. A distant alarm chirped once. Then again. Claire's eyes widened. The cameras. Ethan nodded. They are coming back. Miles looked toward the door. For the first time, his composure cracked. Kane turned on him. You said this floor was blind. Ethan's voice remained low. It was. He looked at the access panel beside the wall. Until the maintenance worker did his job. The first sound came from beyond the service door. Not footsteps this time. Radios. Several voices, organized and close. Kane looked toward the hallway. Miles looked toward Kane. The youngest man lowered his eyes. Ethan stayed where he was. It is over, Claire said. Kane turned back to her. You do not know that. Ethan answered instead. She does. The words carried no triumph. That was what made them final. A firm knock struck the door. Hotel security. Identify yourselves. Miles moved as if to speak, but Claire raised one hand. Do not. Another voice came through, stronger and more controlled. Claire Whitmore, if you can hear me, step away from anyone you do not trust. Ethan looked at her. That includes me. Claire almost laughed from the nerves of it. I think I will take my chances. The door opened moments later under controlled supervision, and the room filled with hotel security, federal agents, and local officers who had been called after the restored camera network showed unauthorized movement across the floor. No one shouted. No one needed to. The balance had changed completely. Kane and the other 2 men were separated from the group without further escalation. Miles protested loudly, demanding to know why he was being questioned. Claire watched him with a face that had gone colder with every word. Ethan quietly picked up his screwdriver. One officer noticed. Sir, leave that where it is. Ethan stopped immediately and set it down. Understood. Name. Ethan Walker. The officer began writing. Then someone in the hallway stopped walking. Walker. The voice was older. Deeper. Ethan's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. A man in his late 50s entered the room wearing a dark suit beneath a raincoat, silver beginning at his temples. He had arrived with a federal protective detail after Whitmore Aerospace triggered emergency protocols. His eyes found Ethan and did not move. Ethan Walker? Ethan looked at him. Commander Hale. Claire turned toward them. Commander Thomas Hale stared as if he had just seen a photograph step out of an old frame. I heard you were in Oregon. Was. Then Virginia. For a while. Hale gave a short breath of disbelief. And now you are fixing hotel wiring? Ethan looked at the maintenance badge clipped to his shirt. It pays on time. Hale almost smiled, but something heavier passed through his expression. Respect. Memory. Loss. One of the officers glanced between them. You know this man? Hale did not answer immediately. He stepped closer to Ethan, lowered his voice, then changed his mind and spoke clearly. I served with him. The room became still. Claire's eyes narrowed. Served where? Hale looked at Ethan first, as if asking permission without words. Ethan gave none. He also did not stop him. Naval Special Warfare. Claire stared at Ethan. The maintenance shirt. The quiet eyes. The three details he always noticed before anyone else. Suddenly, they belonged to a different history. Hale continued. He was a Navy SEAL. Miles stopped talking. Kane looked up for the first time since security entered. Even the officer holding the notepad paused. Ethan's face showed no pride. Former, he said. Hale looked at him. That word does not erase what you were. It is not supposed to. Claire stepped closer. Why did you never say anything? Ethan looked at her with the same calm he had carried through the entire afternoon. You never asked. Hale studied him for another second. Still the same. Ethan shook his head. No, his voice softened. I have a daughter now. The room went quiet again, but this silence was different. No fear. No mockery. Just the slow realization that the man everyone had mistaken for background had spent the entire day doing exactly what he had trained himself to do years ago. Protect first. Explain later. Claire did not look at Ethan the same way after that. Not because he had once worn a uniform. Not because Commander Hale had spoken his name with respect. It was because Ethan had never needed any of it to make himself larger in the room. He had been mocked, dismissed, ordered around, and treated like background noise. He had answered almost all of it with silence. Now that silence felt different. It felt earned. Miles Grant was escorted into a nearby conference room for questioning, still insisting the entire situation was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect her, he said. That is my job. Claire stood outside the glass wall, arms folded. Then why did you lie about the cameras? Miles looked at her. I did not. Ethan was several feet away, speaking quietly with Hale, but he heard the answer. He turned. Yes, you did. Miles exhaled. You again. Ethan stepped closer, not confrontational, simply steady. At 12:37, the east cameras failed. Miles said nothing. At 12:41, you told Claire the floor was secure. Because I believed it was. At 12:43, the access locks began opening. Ethan's eyes stayed on him. You never asked which doors. Claire's expression changed. Miles looked toward her, then back at Ethan. What is that supposed to prove? That you already knew. Silence settled over the room. Hale watched without interrupting. Claire took one slow breath. Keep going. Ethan nodded toward the security console, now restored on the wall. The men who came after you did not search the floor. They moved directly through blind corridors. They avoided the staffed elevators. They knew which stairwell had been compromised. And when they entered the service room, one of them kept looking at Miles instead of you. Miles shook his head. Coincidence. 6 times. You counted. Yes. Hale almost smiled at that, but Claire did not. Ethan continued. There were 3 men in that corridor, but the plan needed 4 people. Miles finally went still. Claire's voice dropped. The 4th was inside my security team. No one answered. She looked at the man who had stood beside her at board meetings, airports, charity events, and private dinners for nearly 5 years. Was it you? Miles looked away. That was enough to break something in her face. Not anger. Something sadder. Betrayal rarely arrives wearing the face of an enemy. More often, it borrows the voice of someone you trusted. Hale motioned to an agent, who placed a recovered access log on the table. A sequence of overrides appeared under Miles Grant's credentials. East corridor cameras. Stairwell lock. Signal repeater. Claire stared at the screen. You sold my route. Miles finally spoke. You were going to destroy everything. No, Claire said. I was going to expose what was already broken. His jaw tightened. You do not understand what was at stake. Ethan answered quietly. People always say that when they want fear to sound like principle. Miles looked at him with open resentment. You think you are better than me? Ethan shook his head. No. Then stop judging me. I am not. Ethan glanced toward Claire. But she deserves the truth. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second, then opened them. Take him. As Miles was led away for further questioning, the room stayed silent. Claire turned toward Ethan. How did you see all of that? Ethan picked up his old canvas jacket from a chair. I paid attention. She studied him. That is all. Ethan thought of Sophie waiting at home, probably staring at the permission slip on the kitchen counter like it had personally offended her. Then he looked back at Claire. Most people tell you who they are long before they admit it. Claire glanced through the glass as Miles disappeared down the hall. And what did I tell you? Ethan paused. That you still trusted the truth after it became expensive. For the first time that day, Claire had no answer. By the time Ethan reached home, it was almost 10 o'clock. The porch light was on, and Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table in pajamas with the permission slip placed directly in front of her like evidence in a courtroom. Ethan opened the door quietly. She looked up. You are late. He nodded. I know. You promised. I did. Sophie studied his face for a moment, then noticed the exhaustion in his eyes. Bad day. Ethan set his jacket over a chair. Complicated day. She pushed the paper toward him. You still forgot this. Ethan smiled, signed it, and handed it back. There. Sophie folded it carefully. Movie night tomorrow? Absolutely. Promise. He looked at her. This time, there was no hesitation. Promise. 3 days later, Whitmore Aerospace released the files Claire had intended to make public. The evidence triggered federal investigations, suspended contracts, and the removal of several executives connected to the corruption scheme. Miles Grant was formally charged with conspiracy and unlawful access to protected security systems. Claire refused every suggestion that the matter should be handled quietly. Truth does not become less true because it is inconvenient, she told her board. And for the first time in years, no one in that room tried to talk over her. Ethan returned to work at the Grand Meridian. Same gray shirt, same maintenance cart, same coffee growing cold beside his tools. But the building felt different now. Employees who had barely noticed him before suddenly knew his name. Some offered handshakes. Others offered apologies. His supervisor approached him near the lobby chandelier, awkward and uncertain. Walker. Ethan looked down from the ladder. Yes. The man cleared his throat. About what I said the other day. Ethan waited. I was out of line. Ethan climbed down. You were. The supervisor blinked, then nodded. Fair enough. Ethan gave him a small smile. We are good. That was dignity. Not pretending disrespect never happened. Not demanding humiliation in return. Simply refusing to carry bitterness farther than necessary. A week later, a black sedan stopped outside Ethan's modest house just before sunset. Sophie ran to the window. Dad, somebody fancy is here. Ethan looked up from the sink. That sounds serious. The doorbell rang. He opened the door and found Claire standing on the porch without assistants, attorneys, or security. Just Claire. She held 2 things. A small envelope and a bakery box. I was told people bring dessert when they visit someone's home. Ethan looked at the box. That depends on the dessert. Apple pie. Sophie appeared behind him. You can come in. Claire laughed softly. Ethan glanced at his daughter. Good to know I still make decisions here. Claire handed him the envelope. This is not money. Ethan opened it. Inside was an offer for a senior security consulting position with flexible hours, full benefits, and enough time written into the contract for school pickups, parent conferences, and movie nights. Ethan looked at her. You researched my schedule? Sophie helped. He turned slowly. Sophie smiled. She called. Claire grew more serious. I am not offering it because you were a Navy SEAL. I am offering it because when everyone else was looking at power, you were looking at people. Ethan folded the letter. I need to think about it. I hoped you would. She turned toward the porch steps, then stopped. One more thing. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Claire looked back at him, warmth finally replacing the guarded expression he remembered from the hotel. Right door. Ethan was silent for a moment. Then Sophie whispered loudly from behind him. Say yes. Ethan smiled. Yeah. He opened the door wider. Right door. And sometimes redemption does not arrive with applause, medals, or headlines. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carrying apple pie, asking for a second chance, and finding a man who no longer needs the world to know who he used to be, because the people who matter already know who he is.